In the first variation of the first fill, we're simply going to move the second, right, left, right, those three accents, onto the first tom. Okay? Right, left, right. And then we come straight back to the snare for that double left, and then the bass drum after that, of course. All right? But we don't do it with the first right, left, right. That stays on the snare. So we've now got this. 1, E and R, 2, E and R, 3, E and R, 4, E and R. Okay? Nice and simple. Faster. Okay, I should mention at this point something that's, I think, a really excellent training exercise when you're practicing this stuff to a metronome, which you should be doing pretty much all the time that you practice the drums. And that is to give yourself what I just call the random metronome test. Now, I do this to myself a lot, and I also give this to my students. And the first time you do it, it's a real eye-opener, and it's kind of a humbling experience at the same time, because very quickly you start to identify where your potential tempo ranges are that you have problems staying inside and not speeding up and slowing down. So the random metronome test, it just comes from, I mean, these days most people are using a metronome app on their smartphone and whatnot, but back in the day, back in the 90s and stuff, when I started doing this when I was a teenager, I just had a Dr. Beat 66 and then a Dr. Beat 88, and it's got one of those, little wheels that you spin around, and the cool thing was you just spin it, and whatever it would land on, you'd try and really nail the tempo. So it could be anything, 137, 84, 65, whatever. And it's fine to be able to play things at like 60, 80, 100. And I've certainly made a lot of backing tracks in my DVDs that are at those sort of set separate tempos. But really, you want to be able to play anything at any tempo. And so that's a fantastic exercise. So if you find that, you're starting to get really comfortable with a fill at a certain speed and you think you've got that down, that's great. But really sort of give yourself a bit of a reality check and maybe flip the metronome back 20 or 30 beats per minute or forward 20 or 30 beats per minute and just see, can you still play it at those faster and slower tempos? And you'll be surprised. It's not always the faster tempos that are harder. We think that because it probably takes more physical effort to play faster simply because you're moving quicker, that it's automatically harder. And it certainly is harder in some ways, but often I find it's much harder to nail fills or beats even at the really slow tempos, because when you're playing slow, there's so much real time in between each note. It's like there are these big gaps that you can fall into and make a mistake, So certainly practice all of this stuff at a whole range of different tempos. Okay, the other thing I wanted to point out with this fill, when you're coming back from the tom, okay, it's important that your left hand gets in the ready position to do two soft lefts back on the snare, preferably in the center of the snare, before the bass drum. And the thing is, sometimes when you're coming in off toms or you're coming in from, say, this side of the kit back to the snare, there can often be a lot of momentum and velocity in getting back there, and often that equates to then hitting the drum quite hard. So you've got to kind of do your right, left, right, and then use that time that you're hitting that last right to set your left hand up in that low position. Don't just go, get it low first, position, and then hit. Okay, and that in itself can take some practice. Okay, that's the first variation.